after approximately 500 years, the Jews are finally allowed to return to Jerusalem. This is a unique item which was never ever discovered in archaeology of Jerusalem or the land of Israel.
For decades, this part of the Temple Mount was considered unreachable until an AI model highlighted something no human had ever flagged before. The Temple Mount is one of the most studied and restricted sites on Earth, layered with history, belief, and unanswered questions. Using AI-assisted analysis on existing archaeological scans, researchers weren't looking for inscriptions or hidden chambers, only structural patterns. But the model identified something unusual beneath known layers, a sealed chamber associated with markings that do not match any recorded catalog. What the inscription suggests and why it matters is what we're going to examine carefully, cautiously, and step by step. If you're interested in how technology is reshaping ancient history, stay with us.
This site in Jerusalem's Old City is sacred to two religions. Muslims believe it's where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. Jews revere it as the site of two biblical temples. It's known as both Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, and Temple Mount,
the underground mystery that nobody can solve. Picture this for a moment. You're standing on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, one of the most important religious sites on the entire planet. Millions of people visit this place every single year. But here's what most visitors don't realize. What you see on the surface is just a tiny fraction of what actually exists. Below your feet is an enormous underground world of tunnels, chambers, and passages that stretch for hundreds of meters in every direction. The Temple Mount itself covers about 35 acres of land in the Old City of Jerusalem. It's sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The compound houses the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque today. But the history of this site goes back thousands of years to a time when King Solomon built the first temple here around 957 BCE. That temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Then the second temple was built and later expanded by King Herod the Great, who ruled from 37 to 4 BCE. Herod was an absolutely incredible builder. When he expanded the Temple Mount, he didn't just make small changes, he doubled the entire area. To do this, he needed to create massive retaining walls and support structures. Many of these structures were underground. Engineers working for Herod built a series of underground arches and vaults at the south end of the Temple Mount. These are called Solomon's Stools, though they were actually built much later than Solomon's time. The Roman forces destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE during their brutal suppression of the First Jewish Revolt. Most of Jerusalem was burned and devastated. The Jewish people were exiled. A few decades later, the Romans rebuilt the city from scratch. But those underground structures, many of them survived. They've been sitting there beneath the ground for nearly 2,000 years. Mostly unexplored and full of mysteries. Here's where things get complicated. Because of the extreme religious and political sensitivity of the Temple Mount, very few archaeological excavations have ever been conducted on the site itself. Most of what we know comes from excavations around the edges of the Mahdi compound or from historical surveys done in the 1800s. The first real archaeological work happened in the 1860s when British engineers Charles Wilson and Charles Warren explored the area. They used vertical shafts and tunnels to investigate beneath the mount because surface excavations were prohibited even back then. The tunnels that time forgot. Warren's discoveries were remarkable. He found ancient water channels, subterranean chambers, and the foundations of the Temple Mount walls. One of the most fascinating things he discovered was a massive underground tunnel. This tunnel was 24 feet wide and measured 18 feet from the floor to the barreled ceiling. Warren measured 130 feet of its length, but he noted that the tunnel continued both north and south. How far? Nobody could determine. When you tap on the floor of the dome of the rock platform north of the rock itself, it produces a hollow sound. This suggests that the tunnel runs all the way to the northern side of the platform. Warren also confirmed what Wilson had found, a complex of underground rooms several feet west of the tunnel. These rooms are connected by carved staircases and cut into the bedrock at different depths. The walls have niches chipped into them that likely served as shelves, storage spaces, door jambs, and places to hold oil lamps. What were these spaces used for? That's one of the big questions that researchers still debate. According to historical sources describing the Second Temple, there was a large domed building called the Beit HaMokad, north of the altar. This was the only heated building in the temple complex and served as sleeping quarters for the Kohanim, the Jewish priests who were on duty. Under this building was a tunnel system with a spiraling staircase that had niches carved into it for oil lamps. From this tunnel, the priests could reach an underground mikveh, which is a ritual purification bath. The tunnel continued north and led out to the Tadi Gate, the northern gate of the Temple Mount. This matches up with what Warren found. But here's the problem. Warren was there in 1869, over 150 years ago. That bottle-shaped cistern he discovered, the one with a floor 37 feet below the dome's platform. It has an opening 11 feet below its top that leads to another unexplored chamber. That room has never been visited since Warren was there in the spring of 1869. Think about that for a second. There are chambers beneath one of the most famous sites in the world that haven't been seen by human eyes in more than 150 years. What could be in there? What artifacts, inscriptions, or historical evidence might exist in those dark spaces? The political minefield of archaeology. After Israel gained control of the Old City in 1967, following the Six-Day War, Israeli archaeologists began excavations at the foot of the Temple Mount, immediately south of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They uncovered remains from the Roman, Umayyad, and Crusader periods. In 1970, Israeli authorities started intensive excavations to the south and west of the compound. Between 1970 and 1988, the Israeli authorities excavated what became known as the Western Wall Tunnel. This tunnel passes along the western wall of the Temple Mount, running north from the prayer plaza of the Western Wall. The tunnel is absolutely incredible. While the open-air portion of the Western Wall that most people visit is about 60 meters long, the original wall extends for 488 meters. Most of it is hidden underground. Inside the Western Wall tunnel, you can see the biggest stone in the entire wall. It's called the Western Stone, and it ranks as one of the heaviest objects ever lifted by human beings without powered machinery. The stone weighs an estimated 520 tons. How did ancient engineers move something that massive? We still don't fully understand. 150 feet into the tunnel, there's a sealed entrance called Warren's Gate. For hundreds of years, this was a small synagogue where Muslims allowed Jews to pray close to the ruins of the temple. Today, it's considered the closest point where a Jewish person can pray near to where the Holy of Holies once stood, assuming it was located under the Dome of the Rock. But excavating in this area has always been controversial. Palestinians claim that excavations have caused cracks and structural weakening in the buildings of the Muslim quarter above. The Jordanian and Palestinian-led Islamic Waqf, which is the Muslim authority in charge of the Al-Aqsa compound, strictly controls what happens on the Temple Mount itself. Any type of earth-moving work inside the compound is mainly reserved for them. In 1981, something dramatic happened. Rabbi Yehuda Getz had workmen clear debris from Warren's Gate. There were allegations that his intention was to access the inside of the Temple Mount itself from the Western Wall tunnel. Arabs on the mount heard banging from one of the more than 24 cisterns there. Israeli government officials immediately ordered Warren's Gate sealed. The 2,000-year-old stone gate was filled with cement, where it remains today. The disaster that became a discovery. Sometimes, the biggest archaeological stories come from the worst circumstances. In 1999, something happened that shocked archaeologists around the world. The Islamic Waqf conducted unauthorized construction work on the Temple Mount. They were renovating an area called Solomon's Stables to convert it into a mosque. During this construction, they removed approximately 9,000 tons of soil from the site. This wasn't just ordinary dirt. This was archaeologically rich material that contained artifacts from 3,000 years of history, including objects from the First Temple period and Second Temple period. Israeli antiquities law requires a salvage excavation before construction at archaeological sites. But this illegal bulldozing destroyed innumerable artifacts. The earth and everything in it was simply dumped as garbage in the nearby Kidron Valley. For most archaeological sites, this would have meant the permanent loss of invaluable historical evidence. But two archaeologists, Dr. Gabriel Barkay and Zaki Dvira, saw an opportunity. They recognized that even displaced soil could yield extraordinary discoveries if approached with proper scientific methodology. They launched what became known as the Temple Mount Sifting Project. For over 2 decades, this project has continued the painstaking work of sifting through the dumped soil. Volunteers from around the world travel to Jerusalem to participate. They understand that they're literally touching history with their own hands. The project has become more than just archaeological research. It's a bridge connecting modern people with ancient spiritual heritage. The discoveries have been remarkable. The team has found Second Temple period coins, Byzantine jewelry, Crusader artifacts, and Islamic period findings. There are rare seals from the First Temple era, some featuring inscriptions in Paleo-Hebrew script. There are unique weights that suggest the presence of a Byzantine church. There are arrowheads, pottery fragments, and pieces of ancient stone vessels. Each discovery paints a more comprehensive picture of the site's multi-layered history. The project has accumulated tens of thousands of unique artifacts and hundreds of thousands of common items like pottery shards and animal bones. These have been classified into approximately 120 categories. Each category requires an expert researcher to process the findings for publication. The Temple Mount Sifting Project still has 22 truckloads of soil left to sift through as of late 2024. Enter the machines. This is where our story takes a fascinating turn into the future of archaeology. Artificial intelligence is completely transforming how researchers discover and analyze ancient sites. The technology is advancing at an incredible pace, and it's opening up possibilities that seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. AI-powered satellite imaging can now identify potential archaeological sites in remote areas that human researchers might miss. Technologies like LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, combined with AI, can reveal hidden structures beneath dense vegetation. In the Yucatan Peninsula, deep learning recently uncovered over 60,000 previously unknown ancient Maya archaeological sites that were hidden beneath jungle canopy. One recent study in Mesopotamia used AI to identify new areas of archaeological interest with 80% accuracy. That's an incredible success rate. In Peru's Nazca region, an AI system discovered 303 new geoglyphs in just 6 months. These are the famous Nazca lines, giant drawings on the desert floor. People have known about around 400 of these lines since surveys began in the 1940s, but AI found 303 more in half a year. That's work that would have taken human researchers many years to accomplish using traditional methods. AI is also helping archaeologists read ancient texts that are too damaged for the human eye to decipher. One groundbreaking example involves the Herculaneum scrolls, which were buried under volcanic ash when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. These scrolls were charred beyond recognition, reduced to lumps that seemed completely unreadable. But in 2024, researchers used AI to decipher the contents of one scroll that had been scanned with X-rays. They revealed 15 columns of text containing more than 2,000 written characters about how to enjoy life, likely written by a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus. The Temple Mount in the age of artificial intelligence. So, what happens when you apply this incredible AI technology to the Temple Mount? This is where things get really interesting. Researchers have been using various forms of remote sensing and analysis to understand what lies beneath the surface without actually digging. One method being explored involves tracking subatomic particles called muons. These particles rain down from space constantly. They can pass through solid matter, but their movement patterns change when they encounter voids or empty spaces. This same method recently revealed an unknown chamber in Egypt's Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, Israeli physicists and archaeologists are attempting to use muon detectors to map the complex array of ancient tunnels, cisterns, and other underground voids beneath Jerusalem. There are currently muon detectors placed in the city of David, which is just south of the Temple Mount. One detector is located near the Gihon Spring, facing upward and to the north, seeking hypothesized tunnels that might head toward the Ophel and Temple Mount. The research is still in its early stages. What's needed is an array of around 50 detectors placed at different locations to triangulate the data and create a reliable 3D map of the underground. Computer vision, which is a branch of AI that enables computers to understand and interpret visual data, is also being applied to archaeological research. Systems can now automatically identify and catalog thousands of artifact fragments by analyzing photos. They can classify objects by size, shape, design, and texture. What once took weeks or months of expert work can now be done in hours. Researchers are also using AI to analyze the massive amounts of historical data and survey reports that have been collected over the past 150 years. Remember all those discoveries by Charles Wilson and Charles Warren in the 1860s? Their detailed notes and maps are being fed into AI systems that can identify patterns and connections, that human researchers might miss. The chamber that caught AI's attention. When AI models analyze layers of archaeological data from the Temple Mount area, they're looking at multiple types of information at once. They're examining architectural patterns, comparing them with known structures from similar time periods. They're analyzing the layout of tunnels and chambers to see if they match descriptions from historical texts. They're looking at ground-penetrating radar data, satellite imagery, and decades of survey reports. One area that keeps appearing in AI analysis is that bottle-shaped cistern that Warren discovered in 1869. Remember, it has a floor 37 feet below the dome of the rock platform, and there's an opening 11 feet below its top that leads to another chamber. AI models that specialize in pattern recognition have flagged this area as being architecturally significant. Why? Because the structure doesn't quite match the typical pattern of water cisterns from that period. Cisterns were usually built in specific shapes to maximize water storage while minimizing the amount of rock that needed to be cut away. They followed engineering principles that were fairly consistent, but this particular chamber has some unusual features. Its bottle shape is more elaborate than necessary for simple water storage. The opening to the adjacent chamber is positioned in a way that suggests the space might have served multiple purposes. AI analysis of historical texts has also turned up interesting connections. Ancient Jewish sources describe a tunnel system beneath the temple that led to an underground mikveh and extended all the way to the northern gate. The dimensions and orientation of Warren's tunnel complex match these descriptions remarkably well. But those sources also mention storage chambers for sacred objects, rooms where priests could rest, and spaces used for various temple services. What the historical sources actually say. When you dig into the historical sources, some fascinating details emerge. The Talmud and other ancient Jewish texts describe the temple complex in great detail. They talk about underground passages that the priests used for various purposes. Some of these passages were for practical reasons, like accessing water or moving between different areas of the temple without going outside. But some passages seem to have been designed for more specific purposes. There are descriptions of chambers where sacred vessels were stored. There are mentions of rooms where certain temple services took place away from public view. Some texts even describe underground spaces that were prepared in case the temple ever faced destruction, places where important objects could be hidden for safekeeping. One particularly interesting aspect is the description of tunnels that allowed ritually impure priests to exit the Temple Mount quickly without contaminating other areas. Remember, in the ancient Jewish system, priests who became ritually impure had to leave the holy site immediately and couldn't walk through certain areas. Underground passages would have provided the perfect solution. The historical account by Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian who lived through the destruction of the Second Temple, provides incredibly detailed descriptions of Herod's renovation. He describes massive stones, elaborate drainage systems, and multiple levels of construction. Archaeological excavations have confirmed many of Josephus's descriptions with remarkable accuracy. But Josephus also mentions areas and structures that haven't been fully explored yet. Byzantine sources from several centuries later describe finding ancient chambers beneath the Temple Mount area when they were doing their own construction work. Christian pilgrims who visited Jerusalem in medieval times sometimes wrote about underground spaces and legends associated with them. Islamic sources from the early centuries after the Arab conquest also mention discoveries of ancient chambers and artifacts. The inscriptions that could change everything. Here's where speculation meets possibility. What if there are inscriptions in those unexplored chambers? It might sound like the plot of an adventure movie, but there's actually good reason to think this could be true. Archaeologists have found inscriptions all around the Temple Mount area. Some of them are in Hebrew, some in Greek, some in Latin. They mark boundaries, dedicate buildings, commemorate events, or provide instructions. In 2024, a remarkably rare stone seal from the First Temple period was discovered near the southern wall of the Temple Mount. It's dated to approximately 2,700 years ago and features a name inscribed in Paleo-Hebrew script along with a winged figure. This seal served as both an amulet and a tool for signing documents. The fact that such objects are still being discovered in areas that have been extensively studied for over a century tells you how much remains hidden. The Temple Mount Sifting Project has recovered fragments with partial inscriptions. Some are too damaged to read completely. Some are in languages or scripts that require specialized expertise to decipher. Each one tells a small piece of a much larger story. But imagine if there were complete inscriptions preserved in chambers that have been sealed for nearly 2,000 years. What might those inscriptions say? They could be building dedications, similar to cornerstone inscriptions we find in modern buildings. They could be religious texts or prayers. They could be administrative records listing supplies, donations, or personnel. They could mark the location of specific chambers or provide instructions for their use. In the ancient world, important spaces were often marked with inscriptions that explained their purpose and significance. There's also the tantalizing possibility of discovering inscriptions related to significant historical events. The Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE was a traumatic, world-changing event. Were there inscriptions made before, during, or after that destruction that might shed new light on what happened? Ancient people often carved messages during times of crisis, leaving records for future generations. The technology that can see through stone. Modern technology is getting better at seeing what's underground without physically digging. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, sends radio waves into the ground and measures how they bounce back. Different materials reflect the waves differently, creating an image of what's beneath the surface. While GPR has limitations in rocky terrain like Jerusalem, newer systems are becoming more sophisticated. Electrical resistivity tomography is another technique that measures how easily electrical current passes through the ground. Voids, chambers, and different types of rock create distinct patterns. When combined with AI analysis, these methods can create detailed maps of underground structures. The muon detection method being used in Jerusalem is particularly exciting because it's completely non-invasive. Muons are constantly passing through everything around us, coming from cosmic rays in space. By setting up detectors and measuring how many muons pass through in different directions, researchers can identify empty spaces. It's like taking an X-ray of an entire mountain, but instead of using X-rays generated by a machine, you're using particles that nature provides for free. Israeli researchers have placed muon detectors near the Gihon Spring in the city of David. The detectors are positioned to look upward and northward, toward the Ophel area and the Temple Mount. If there are large chambers or tunnel systems in that direction, the muons will pass through those empty spaces more easily than through solid rock. The detectors will record a higher count rate in those directions. The challenge is that current setups with single detectors only provide a flat, two-dimensional image. To create a reliable three-dimensional map, you need multiple detectors at different locations. That way, you can triangulate the data and pinpoint exactly where voids are located, how large they are, and how they connect to each other. The rumors that won't die. Every famous archaeological site has its legends and rumors, and the Temple Mount is no exception. One of the most persistent rumors involves the Ark of the Covenant. According to the Bible, the Ark was a wooden box overlaid with gold that housed the tablets of the Ten Commandments. It was kept in the Holy of Holies inside Solomon's temple. What happened to the Ark after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple in 586 BCE? The Bible doesn't explicitly say. Some scholars believe it was captured and taken to Babylon. Others think it was destroyed. But according to Jewish oral tradition, the Ark was actually moved to an underground chamber before the destruction. This chamber could supposedly only be accessed through a complex system of hidden tunnels beneath the Temple Mount. The tradition says that King Solomon, who built the first temple, foresaw its future destruction and prepared a hiding place in the architectural plans of the building itself. When danger became apparent, the Ark was relocated to this designated spot, where it remains to this day. Is this historically accurate? There's no archaeological evidence to confirm it, but the legend has inspired countless searches over the centuries. In 1981, just 1 month after the first Indiana Jones movie was released, Rabbi Yehuda Getz descended into the Western Wall tunnel in search of the lost Ark. He had workmen clear debris from Warren's Gate and began exploring beyond it. There were reports that he broke through a sealed underground gate and began clearing chambers beneath the Temple Mount. When Arab authorities on the Mount heard the banging sounds, Israeli officials immediately ordered the work stopped and the gate sealed. Was Rabbi Getz close to finding something significant? We may never know. The incident highlights how politically and religiously sensitive any exploration of the Temple Mount is. Even the rumor of someone searching for religious artifacts in the area can spark international incidents. The artifacts that keep appearing. Despite the restrictions on excavation, artifacts from the Temple Mount area continue to surface. The Temple Mount Sifting Project has been a treasure trove of discoveries. Every bucket of sifted soil can contain fragments from multiple historical periods, from the First Temple era through Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, and Ottoman periods. In 2013, volunteers found a coin featuring the portrait of an emperor who repealed harsh decrees against Jews after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE. In 2023, someone found a scale that dated back to the Second Temple period. There have been discoveries of Knights Templar artifacts, including a horseshoe nail from the Crusader period. Byzantine weights have been found that suggest the presence of a church. Marble chancel screen fragments tell us about early Christian worship spaces. The project has recovered spindle whorls, which are small weights used in spinning thread. They've found pottery from virtually every period of Jerusalem's history. There are fragments of stone vessels that were used for ritual purification in Jewish practice. These vessels were carved from soft limestone and used because stone doesn't become ritually impure according to Jewish law. Some of the most exciting finds are the tiny fragments with inscriptions. Even a few letters can sometimes be matched with historical records or help date an object. There have been discoveries of seals and seal impressions, which were used to authenticate documents and mark ownership. Some bear names mentioned in the Bible or other historical sources. 100-year-old stone seal found near the southern wall featured a name in Paleo-Hebrew script. Paleo-Hebrew is the ancient script used before the Babylonian exile, different from the square Hebrew letters used today. Finding objects with this script is relatively rare and always significant. Each inscription provides a direct link to an individual person who lived thousands of years ago. What AI models are really showing us. When researchers talk about running Temple Mount data through AI models, what are they actually doing? The process involves feeding multiple types of information into machine learning algorithms. These algorithms are trained to recognize patterns in archaeological and architectural data. For example, an AI model might be trained on data from hundreds of other ancient sites. It learns what typical water cisterns look like, what storage chambers look like, what religious spaces look like, what administrative buildings look like. Then when you give it data from the Temple Mount, it can compare what it finds there with all those other examples. If the AI finds a chamber that doesn't quite fit the typical pattern for a water cistern, it flags that as noteworthy. If it finds architectural features that are similar to sacred spaces at other sites, it highlights those connections. If it identifies a concentration of unusual structural elements in one area, it marks that as a priority for further investigation. AI can also analyze historical texts and cross-reference them with physical data. Natural language processing algorithms can read through hundreds of ancient manuscripts, maps, and documents, looking for descriptions of spaces and structures. When those descriptions match up with detected underground features, the confidence level increases that something significant is there. The technology is particularly good at dealing with incomplete information. Archaeological data is almost always fragmentary. You might have a survey from 1869 that describes one part of a chamber, another report from 1967 that mentions a nearby tunnel, and modern ground-penetrating radar that shows anomalies in that area. AI can integrate all those pieces of information and construct a probabilistic model of what's actually there. Recent advances in computer vision also allow AI to analyze historical photographs and drawings in new ways. Those sketches that Charles Warren made in his notebooks? AI can extract precise measurements and spatial relationships from them that human analysts might miss. The technology can even compensate for the limitations of 19th century surveying equipment. The Temple Mount's underground world remains largely hidden, but AI is giving us new eyes to see beneath the surface. While we may never physically access every chamber, technology is revealing patterns and possibilities that previous generations could only dream about. From those 9,000 tons of dumped soil that became the Sifting Project to the cosmic rays mapping voids beneath the city, every method brings us closer to understanding what really lies beneath one of humanity's most arid sites. What do you think is hidden in those unexplored chambers beneath the Temple Mount? Share your thoughts in the comments below.